The massive alien ship appeared on a quiet Tuesday morning, its silver hull gleaming against Earth's blue sky. It was 3 times the size of the largest aircraft carrier ever built, and its sudden appearance above New York City brought the world to a standstill. No one panicked. After decades of science fiction movies and books, humanity had mentally prepared itself for this moment. News channels switched to live coverage. Social media exploded with millions of posts, and governments worldwide called emergency meetings. The alien ship simply hovered, waiting. Hours later, a smaller vessel descended from the mothership, landing smoothly in front of the United Nations headquarters. The world watched as the first alien diplomats emerged. They looked almost human, except for their silvery skin and slightly larger eyes. Their leader stepped forward, introducing himself in perfect English as Thomas Smith, a name he claimed to have chosen from their database of human names to make communication easier. "We represent the Stellar Coalition," Thomas announced to the hastily gathered UN Assembly. "We have been observing your species for the past 50 years. His voice carried a slight metallic echo, but his words were clear. "We have come to offer you protection." The UN Secretary General leaned forward. "Protection from what?" Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "From yourselves, primarily, and from the more aggressive species in our galaxy. Your civilization is still primitive by our standards. You haven't even colonized your own solar system yet." The room grew tense. Representatives from various nations exchanged worried looks. The word primitive hung in the air like an insult. "We understand you've mastered basic nuclear physics," Thomas continued, "and you've taken your first steps into space exploration. However, you're centuries behind the Coalition's minimum standards for independent species status." The Chinese representative stood up. "And what exactly does this protection mean?" Thomas activated a holographic display, showing Earth surrounded by a glowing shield. "We will establish a protective boundary around your solar system. No hostile species will be able to enter. We'll provide basic technological oversight and ensure your development follows safe, approved paths." "You're talking about turning Earth into a reservation," the Russian representative said, his voice cold. "A zoo for humans." Thomas shook his head. "Think of it more as a wildlife preserve, a safe space for your species to develop under our guidance. We've done this for dozens of primitive species. It's for your own good." The American representative, a former Marine general, stood up straight. "And if we refuse?" "The galaxy is a dangerous place," Thomas replied smoothly. "Unprotected primitive species often don't survive their first contact with more advanced civilizations. We're offering you safety." The UN Assembly erupted in heated discussions. Thomas waited patiently, his silver skin reflecting the room's lights. He seemed completely confident, even slightly bored, as if he'd done this many times before. The Secretary General called for order. "We will need time to discuss this offer among ourselves." "Of course," Thomas nodded. "You have 48 Earth hours to accept our protection. After that, we'll be forced to implement it anyway, for your own safety, naturally." As Thomas and his delegation left the chamber, the world's leaders gathered in private emergency sessions. Military commanders reviewed their options and quickly realized their most powerful weapons would be useless against the alien technology they'd seen. Scientists studied the limited data they had on the alien ship, finding nothing that could help. But in a small office at the UN building, a junior diplomat from India was reading through the Coalition's full proposal. He noticed something interesting: a small clause about species proving their worth through official Coalition testing. His hands shaking with excitement, he immediately called his superiors. Within hours, as the world debated the humiliation of becoming a protected species, a plan began to form. Humanity had been underestimated many times throughout history, and they'd always proven their critics wrong. Perhaps it was time to do it again. The next day, when Thomas returned for their answer, he found something unexpected: a challenge. Earth would take the Coalition's tests, all of them, and prove they weren't primitive at all. Thomas smiled that empty smile again. "No protected species has ever passed our tests," he said. "But you're welcome to try." He had no idea what he'd just started. 1 week after humanity's decision to take the Coalition's tests, Thomas returned with a large black cube. He placed it on the conference table in the UN building, where representatives from every major nation had gathered. "This device contains the details of your trials," he explained, touching the cube's surface. A hologram appeared, showing 3 distinct challenges. You have 1 Earth year to prepare. The tests will measure your species' worth in 3 areas. The room was silent as Thomas listed the challenges. First, a test of intelligence. Your best minds will face our most complex mathematical and engineering problems. He paused, looking around the room. Problems that took other species centuries to solve. The hologram changed, showing what looked like a battlefield. Second, combat simulations. Your military forces will face scenarios designed by our war experts. You'll need to demonstrate tactical thinking at a galactic level. Thomas's smile grew wider. No primitive species has ever passed this portion. The final image showed a complex maze of machinery. Last, you must show your ability to understand and improve upon Coalition technology. You will be given access to basic tools. Show us you can do more than just copy what others have built. Dr. Robert Miller, Earth's chief scientist for the project, studied the hologram carefully. "And if we pass all 3, then you'll earn your independence," Thomas replied. "But remember, failing even 1 test means automatic protected status. No appeals." After Thomas left, the real work began. Within days, a secret facility was built in the Rocky Mountains. The world's best scientists, soldiers, and engineers were brought together. They called it Project Proving Ground. Dr. Miller led the science team. He'd worked on quantum computers before, but the Coalition's math made Earth's most advanced theories look like simple addition. His team spent weeks just trying to understand the basics. "This is impossible," one mathematician said after a month of work. "Their science is too advanced." But Dr. Miller noticed something interesting. While working late one night, he realized the Coalition's approach to mathematics was completely linear. They never took shortcuts, never tried unconventional approaches. "They're too perfect," he told his team the next morning. "They've forgotten how to think outside the box." In the military wing, Commander Lisa Brooks made a similar discovery. The Coalition's combat simulations were flawless, and that was their weakness. They assumed every army would follow the most logical strategy. "But humans rarely do what's logical in war," she explained to her officers. "We adapt. We improvise. We do the unexpected." The engineering team, led by Dr. David Park, had the most surprising breakthrough. While studying the Coalition's basic tools, they realized something incredible. The aliens had given them access to more technology than they realized, simply because they didn't think humans were smart enough to combine different tools in new ways. "It's like they gave us a puzzle, but they don't know we can see how all the pieces fit together," Dr. Park said excitedly. "They're so advanced, they've forgotten the value of simple solutions." 6 months into their preparation, Earth's team made their first major breakthrough. By combining human creativity with Coalition technology, they solved a mathematical problem that Thomas had claimed would take 50 years to figure out. They kept this success secret. In fact, they made sure to look like they were struggling whenever Coalition observers visited. The aliens would watch with satisfaction as humans appeared to fumble with simple concepts. "They're performing exactly as expected," one observer reported back to the Coalition. "They show no signs of passing even the basic levels." But in hidden rooms and secure facilities, humanity was preparing something unprecedented. They weren't just learning to use Coalition technology. They were finding ways to improve it. They weren't just studying alien battle tactics. They were developing strategies the Coalition had never imagined. As the 1-year deadline approached, Earth's team worked harder than ever. They knew they had one chance to prove themselves, One opportunity to show the galaxy that humanity wasn't just another primitive species to be protected. The day before the tests were set to begin, Dr. Miller gathered everyone together. "Tomorrow," he said, "we show them what humans can really do, and I almost feel sorry for them." He smiled. Almost. No one slept that night. The real challenge was about to begin. The first rays of sunlight were hitting the Rocky Mountain facility when Dr. Miller made a discovery that changed everything. He had been reviewing the Coalition's mathematical problems for the 100th time when he spilled his coffee on his notes. As he quickly wiped the paper, the smeared ink revealed a pattern he hadn't seen before. "Get everyone in here now," he shouted, his hands shaking with excitement. Within minutes, the main laboratory was packed with scientists and military personnel. Commander Brooks arrived last, still wearing her combat simulation gear. "Look at this," Dr. Miller pointed to his coffee-stained notes. "We've been thinking about their problems all wrong. The Coalition's mathematics isn't just about finding the right answer. It's about finding it their way." Dr. Park leaned closer to the notes. "What do you mean?" "They gave us these tools." Dr. Miller grabbed several alien devices from his desk, but they never said we had to use them exactly as they do. Remember how humans invented hundreds of ways to make fire, while other species might have only used one method? Commander Brooks's eyes lit up. Just like in their combat simulations, they expect everyone to follow the same tactical rulebook. Exactly. Dr. Miller started writing rapidly on a whiteboard. "Humans are different. We try weird solutions. We make mistakes that lead to breakthroughs. We think in ways that probably seem crazy to them." The team worked through the night, fueled by this new understanding. They stopped trying to copy the Coalition's perfect, logical approaches. Instead, they started solving problems the human way: messy, creative, and surprisingly effective. In the military wing, Commander Brooks had her own breakthrough. During a simulated space battle, she ordered her pilots to do something the Coalition would consider insane: turn off their ship's engines in the middle of combat. "In space, you don't need constant thrust," she explained to her stunned team. "The Coalition's tactics waste energy always keeping their engines on. We can drift silently, conserve power, and surprise them." The alien observers watched these training sessions with growing confusion. They saw humans making what looked like basic mistakes, but they couldn't understand why Earth's team seemed so confident. Dr. Park's engineering team pushed the boundaries even further. They discovered they could combine the Coalition's simple tools in ways the aliens had never considered. By connecting 3 different devices that were meant to be used separately, they created something entirely new. "It's like they gave us building blocks," Dr. Park explained. "But they're so advanced, they forgot you can build more than one way." The team kept most of these discoveries hidden from the Coalition observers. When the aliens visited, they saw exactly what they expected to see: humans struggling with primitive attempts to understand advanced technology. But in secret, Earth's team was preparing surprises for each test. They found ways to solve mathematical problems using half the steps the Coalition thought necessary. They developed battle strategies that seemed to break all the rules but worked better than the correct approaches. They built new devices that the aliens had never imagined, using their own technology in unexpected ways. 1 month before the tests, Dr. Miller called a secret meeting. "We've learned something important about the Coalition," he told the gathered team. "They're so advanced, they've lost something we still have: the ability to think differently. They see one path forward. We see hundreds." Commander Brooks nodded. "They expect us to fail because we're not like them. But that's exactly why we're going to win." Dr. Park held up their latest invention, a combination of 3 Coalition tools that worked better than the original versions. "They think they're testing us, but they don't realize they're about to test themselves. Can they handle seeing their perfect ways improved by primitives?" The team spent their final weeks refining their unconventional solutions. They knew the Coalition would be shocked by their approaches. Some might even call their methods impossible or unfair, but that was the point. Humanity's greatest strength was doing the impossible. As the testing date approached, Earth's team felt ready. They had turned their primitive status into an advantage. Now it was time to show the galaxy that being different didn't mean being inferior. Remember, Dr. Miller told his team the night before the tests, they think they're superior because they're more advanced. We're about to show them that sometimes the best way forward isn't the most advanced one. It's the most creative one. The coalition was about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. The testing arena looked like a mix between a laboratory and a sports stadium. Thousands of holographic screens floated in the air, showing complex equations and engineering problems. Thomas stood at the center, surrounded by coalition observers with silver skin and expressionless faces. "The first test begins now," Thomas announced. "You have 6 hours to solve these engineering challenges. Remember, even one failure means automatic protected status." Dr. Miller led his team into the arena. They looked small compared to the towering aliens around them, but there was confidence in their steps. The coalition observers whispered among themselves, probably betting on how quickly the humans would fail. The first problem appeared on the main screen, a design for an impossible space engine. According to coalition mathematics, it would take at least 4 hours just to understand the basic principles. Dr. Miller smiled. "Begin Plan A," he whispered to his team. Instead of using the coalition's advanced computational tools, the humans pulled out simple pencils and paper. The observers laughed quietly, their silver faces showing what looked like pity. "They've reverted to primitive tools," one observer noted, "just as expected." But 20 minutes later, the laughter stopped. Dr. Park had drawn a rough sketch that shouldn't have been possible. He'd broken down the complex engine design into simple mechanical parts, using basic physics principles that humans had known for centuries. "Impossible," Thomas muttered, watching as the human team rapidly solved problems that should have taken hours. The next challenge involved improving the coalition energy system. Instead of following the standard upgrade path, Dr. Miller's team completely reorganized the system's layout. They used principles from old steam engines, combining them with alien technology in ways that made the coalition scientists stare in disbelief. "They can't do that," one observer protested. "It's not the correct method." "Show us where in the rules it says we must solve it your way," Dr. Miller replied calmly, not looking up from his work. 3 hours into the test, Earth's team had completed challenges that should have taken days. They didn't just solve the problems. They found new solutions that the coalition had never considered. Thomas watched with growing concern as his human observers huddled together, frantically checking the test parameters. The humans weren't cheating. They were just thinking differently, very differently. "Here's the final challenge," Thomas announced, his voice slightly less confident than before. A massive hologram appeared, showing the most complex space station ever designed. "You must find the flaw in this station's design and fix it." The human team gathered around the hologram. Instead of using coalition scanning tools, they walked around it like children studying a toy. Dr. Park pointed at something near the station's core. "There's your problem," he said after just 10 minutes. "Your power distribution is too perfect." "Too perfect?" Thomas asked, confused. Dr. Miller stepped forward to explain. "You've designed it to handle power distribution with exactly 0 waste. But that means if anything goes even slightly wrong, the whole system fails. Sometimes a little inefficiency makes a system more stable. Any human engineer who has worked on a car engine could tell you that." The coalition observers were stunned into silence. The humans hadn't just found the flaw. They'd identified a fundamental problem in coalition engineering philosophy that no one had ever questioned. As the test ended, Thomas struggled to maintain his composure. "You've passed the first test," he admitted. "But the combat trials will be different. No primitive species has ever—" "Let me guess," Commander interrupted, stepping forward with a confident smile. "No primitive species has ever passed those either. Well, we look forward to surprising you again." As the human team left the arena, They could hear heated arguments breaking out among the coalition observers. Some were insisting the tests must have been flawed. Others wanted to study the humans' unusual methods. But Dr. Miller's team didn't stay to listen. They had combat simulations to prepare for, and if today was any indication, the coalition wasn't ready for what humanity had planned. "One test down," Dr. Park said as they walked back to their preparation area. "Two to go." "Did you see their faces when we used pencil and paper?" Someone laughed. "Just wait until they see what we've planned for the combat trials," Commander Brooks added with a grin. "They think today was shocking. They haven't seen anything yet. The first victory was theirs, but everyone knew the real challenges were still to come." Yet for the first time since the coalition arrived, humanity felt truly confident. They weren't just holding their own. They were rewriting the rules of the game. The combat simulation chamber was enormous. Holographic stars filled the space, creating a perfect replica of a space battlefield. Commander Brooks stood with her team of pilots and strategists, facing Thomas and the coalition's military experts. "This test will simulate real space combat," Thomas explained. "Your ships against our standard patrol fleet. Remember, you must use only the basic coalition ships we provided during training." Commander Brooks nodded, hiding her smile. Her team had spent months practicing with these basic ships, but not in the way the coalition expected. "Begin simulation," Thomas announced. The coalition fleet appeared, 50 ships in perfect formation. They looked beautiful, like silver arrows arranged in textbook patterns. Commander Brooks's team had just 20 ships, all appearing to be scattered randomly. "Their formation is chaos," one coalition officer commented. "This will be quick." The battle began. The coalition fleet moved forward in perfect unison, their tactics following centuries of proven warfare doctrine. But then something strange happened. The human ships turned off their engines. "They've lost power." A coalition observer laughed. "Their systems have failed already." Commander Brooks spoke quietly into her comm. "Execute Operation Deadfloat." The human ships, engines dark, continued moving through space using their existing momentum. Without engine flares, they were nearly invisible against the star field. The coalition fleet's targeting systems, designed to track active ships, struggled to lock onto the drifting vessels. "Impossible," Thomas muttered. "They're using basic physics as a stealth technique." The human ships split into small groups, using the momentum of their initial scatter to drift in different directions. The coalition fleet, trying to maintain their perfect formation, couldn't track all the approaches at once. "Now," Commander Brooks ordered. 20 engines flared to life simultaneously. The human ships, approaching from multiple angles, struck the coalition formation before they could reorganize. It was like watching a perfectly arranged chessboard being attacked by pieces that didn't follow the rules. "They can't do this," a coalition officer protested. "These tactics aren't in any combat manual." "That's exactly why they work," Commander Brooks replied calmly. The simulation continued. When coalition ships regrouped, the humans scattered. When the aliens formed defensive circles, the humans used their own ships' energy signatures to create false targets. Every time the coalition adapted to one human tactic, Brooks's team switched to something completely different. "Stop," Thomas called out after an hour. "This isn't a proper battle." Commander Brooks raised an eyebrow. "We're using your ships, your technology, and we haven't broken any rules. We're just using them our way." The simulation scoreboard told the story. The human fleet had lost only 3 ships. The coalition fleet had lost 37. But you didn't follow any standard tactics," a coalition strategist stammered. "Your ships weren't even in proper formation." "Exactly," Commander Brooks explained. "You expected us to fight like you do. But humans learned warfare differently. We learned it through centuries of fighting on land, sea, and air. We learned that sometimes the best formation is no formation. Sometimes chaos is the best strategy." The coalition military experts huddled together, reviewing the battle recordings. They couldn't understand how their perfect tactics had been defeated by what looked like random movements and improper maneuvers. "You've passed the combat trials," Thomas finally announced, his voice strained. "Though I must note that your methods were highly irregular." "Thank you," Commander Brooks replied. "We try to be irregular whenever possible." As her team left the simulation chamber, they could hear the coalition officers arguing about changing their combat doctrines. Some were already trying to understand how to fight against unpredictable enemies who didn't follow proper military procedures. "One more test to go," Commander Brooks told her celebrating team. "The technology challenge. After what we showed them today, they might be too scared to let us near their advanced tech," one of her pilots joked. Commander Brooks smiled. "Oh, Dr. Park has some surprises planned for them. Today we showed them humans can fight differently. Tomorrow, we'll show them humans can build differently too." The coalition had started these tests thinking they were evaluating a primitive species. Instead, they were learning that their own advanced methods might not be as perfect as they thought. And the final test hadn't even begun yet. The technology testing chamber looked like a giant workshop. Alien tools and devices covered every table. This time, even Thomas seemed nervous as he addressed the human team. "This is your final test," he announced. "You have 4 hours to demonstrate your understanding of coalition technology. Create something that improves upon our basic tools." Dr. Park led his engineering team forward. They had waited months for this moment. Behind them, Dr. Miller and Commander Brooks watched from the observation area, trying not to smile. "Begin," Thomas said. Instead of rushing to the advanced tools, Dr. Park's team started by gathering what the coalition considered their most basic devices: simple power cells, basic material fabricators, and elementary sensor units. "They're using the training wheels again," one coalition observer whispered, shaking his silver head. Dr. Park picked up 3 different devices that weren't meant to work together. "Remember everyone, just like we practiced." The human team split into groups. Each took different coalition devices and began connecting them in ways that made the alien observers increasingly uncomfortable. They weren't following any of the standard engineering protocols. "Stop," a coalition engineer called out after 20 minutes. "Those components aren't compatible." "According to who?" Dr. Park asked, not looking up from his work. His team had already connected a power cell to a fabricator in a way the coalition manual specifically warned against. But instead of exploding, as the coalition engineers expected, the combined device hummed to life. It was working better than either original tool. "Impossible," Thomas muttered, for what felt like the 100th time since testing began. The humans worked quickly, combining technologies that were never meant to be combined. They used cooling systems as power amplifiers. They reversed the flow of energy in ways that should have caused disasters but somehow improved efficiency instead. 2 hours into the test, Dr. Park called everyone to the central table. "Time to bring it all together." The separate groups brought their modified devices to the center. Like pieces of a puzzle the coalition didn't know existed, each part connected perfectly with the others. The resulting machine was unlike anything the aliens had ever seen. "What is that?" Thomas asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Park stepped back, grinning. "We call it a universal adapter. It can take any 2 pieces of coalition tech and make them work together, even ones that aren't supposed to be compatible." To demonstrate, he connected 2 devices that the coalition had declared impossible to combine. The universal adapter glowed, adjusted its settings, and made them work perfectly together. The coalition engineers rushed forward, scanning the invention with their tools. Their silver faces showed a mix of shock, disbelief, and something that looked almost like fear. "This breaks 17 different coalition engineering principles," one alien engineer said. "No," Dr. Park corrected him. "It proves those principles were too limited. You've been so focused on perfecting your existing technology that you forgot to look for new ways to use it." To prove his point, Dr. Park's team spent the next hour demonstrating dozens of new combinations. They showed how their invention could improve coalition ships, enhance their medical equipment, and even make their FTL drives more efficient. Your own tools had all this potential, Dr. Miller added from the observation area. You just never thought to try using them differently. Thomas stood silent for a long time, watching the demonstrations. Finally, he spoke. You've passed all 3 tests, but you've done more than that. You've shown us something we didn't expect to learn. And what's that? Commander Brooks asked. That perhaps we're the ones who need to change, Thomas replied. Your species doesn't just use technology. You reimagine it. You don't just fight battles. You rewrite the rules of warfare. You don't just solve problems. You find new ways to solve them. The human team stood proudly as their invention continued to hum, proving with every second that sometimes the best way forward isn't the most advanced path, it's the most innovative one. So, Dr. Park said, about that protected species status. Thomas actually smiled. A real smile this time. I think it's time for the Coalition to prepare a very different kind of proposal. The final test was over, but humanity's real impact on the galaxy was just beginning. 1 month after the final test, the Coalition's Grand Council chamber was packed with representatives from 50 different alien species. The massive room, with its crystal walls and floating seats, had never been so crowded. Everyone wanted to see the species that had changed everything. Thomas stood at the center platform, looking very different from the confident alien who had first visited Earth. Gone was his superior smile and patronizing tone. The Council recognizes Earth, he announced formally, not as a protected species, but as a full member of the Coalition, with all rights and privileges. Dr. Miller, Commander Brooks, and Dr. Park stood together as Earth's representatives. Behind them, on a giant screen, their home planet glowed blue and beautiful. Furthermore, Thomas continued, we have a request for humanity. He paused, looking almost embarrassed. We want you to teach us. A murmur ran through the alien crowd. Never in Coalition history had advanced species asked to learn from a newer civilization. Your methods are unusual, Thomas explained, but they work. Many Coalition worlds have already started studying your techniques. The Universal Adapter alone has improved technology on 30 different planets. Commander Brooks stepped forward. And our military tactics. A Coalition general stood up. We've already begun incorporating your combat strategies into our training. Though I must admit, our pilots are having trouble turning off their engines in battle. This brought laughter from the crowd. They keep saying it feels wrong. That's the point, Commander Brooks replied with a smile. Sometimes the wrong way is the right way. Dr. Miller addressed the Council next. We're happy to share our knowledge, but we have a condition. The Council members leaned forward, curious. Stop calling newer civilizations primitive, he said. Different doesn't mean inferior. Every species has something to teach, if you're willing to learn. The Council chamber erupted in discussion. Many members nodded in agreement. Some were already talking about other primitive worlds that might deserve a second look. There's more, Dr. Park added. We've received messages from 15 different protected species. They don't want Coalition oversight anymore. They want human teachers instead. Thomas nodded. We expected this. Your success has inspired many worlds. They believe if humanity could prove itself, so can they. Good, Commander Brooks said. Competition breeds innovation. Innovation breeds progress. The Council voted unanimously to accept Earth's condition. The term primitive species was officially removed from Coalition documents, replaced with developing civilization. As the ceremony ended, a young alien approached the human team. Is it true? She asked. Did you really solve our hardest problems using paper and pencils? Dr. Miller laughed. Sometimes the simplest tools are the best tools. Would you like us to teach you? The alien's eyes widened. But I'm from an advanced world. We're not supposed to use primitive, simple methods. That kind of thinking. Commander Brooks said kindly. That's what we're here to change. Later that day, as the human team prepared to return to Earth, Thomas caught up with them. "I need to confess something," he said. "When I first came to Earth, I thought I was being kind, offering protection to a primitive world." He looked at each of them. "I never imagined you would end up protecting us from our own rigid thinking." Dr. Park patted him on the shoulder. "That's the funny thing about advancement. Sometimes you need to look backward to move forward." As their ship lifted off from the Coalition capital world, the team could see hundreds of alien ships forming an honor guard. But instead of flying in perfect formation, each ship chose its own path, creating a beautiful chaos of lights against the dark sky. "Look at that," Dr. Miller said, pointing out the window. "They're already learning." Earth was no longer the primitive world the Coalition had discovered. Instead, it had become something much more important. Proof that greatness can come from unexpected places, and that sometimes the best way to advance isn't to look down on others, but to look up to them. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly what humanity had set out to prove.